Hi there, it's been a while since I've done a gear review, or a gear overview, shall we say. In this particular case, we're looking at the Fjern Gokotta 1-person and the Fjern Gokotta 2-person. I've purchased these with my own money, so they haven't been sent to me. And I bought them because a couple of reasons. First of all, they're very lightweight for the purposes that I have in mind. The 1-person is just 1.1 kilos, the 2-person 1.5 kilos. And secondly, they were on clearance. So the full price for both of these shelters should be £400 and £500 respectively, so that's £900. And I picked them up on a clearance site for just over £350. And I will be using both of these on some adventures shortly. So I thought this would be a good excuse to actually do a review, have a quick look at the actual contents of the packaging, the tent itself, etc., and tell you of the modifications if I'm going to do any at all. So for people who like to pack their shelters away in the same bag they arrived in, that's personally not my taste. I like to split the weight up and make it easy for packaging. Let's just give you an idea of roughly what the packaging would be. Because of the poles folding, you're looking at about 42 centimeters long and 16 centimeters diameter for the 1-person. For the 2-person, fractionally longer at about 45 centimeters with a diameter of about 15-16 centimeters again. So if you're a type of person that wants to put that in your panniers or your other sort of camping equipment, you've got a rough idea of the package size. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unpack both of them, see what the contents are like for them. I'll put all the weights and all the technical things on the screen as we go along, and we can compare the two side by side, and you can see if this particular tent is good for you, and also I can assess if it's going to be good for me for the trips that I've got planned. So let's take them apart. So as you can see, unpacking them all, they come out of the bag nicely. The bag has the instructions there on the cover on both bags as well, which is always useful just in case you forget how to put it all together. The other thing to keep in mind is that the bag is actually the same material as the actual shelters themselves. So if you were to have a bit of an accident, then at least you've got a chunk of material that you could use for a patch should you need to. Now, the material that it's made from is PFC free, and it is nylon, which is coated silicone on one side, and I presume PU coated on the other side, because it is seam sealed, and normally you don't get to seam seal a shelter when it is made from siliconized nylon. But it's PFC free, which is an important thing these days to keep in mind. So there you go, they're unpacked now, and it's pretty well what you'd expect. We have a fly, which can crunch down to quite a small size. The bag, as I say, which gives you some spare material and possibly even some spare clips if you might need it. The inner, in this case on the Solo, the poles and the pegs. And we'll have to see whether they give you enough pegs to actually pitch the tent, because some places, some companies don't. And then on the double, naturally, as you would expect, just more of the same. So still a very respectable small amount here on the fly. Then you've got the inner, then you've got the poles, and of course the pegs. And we'll count up the pegs as well. I do believe we've got the same pegs for the Solo version and the Duo version. Right, let's now just lay out the floor of the inners and measure those for size, and to see what they've got on the website is actually exactly what they've provided me with here. Now, one of the reasons I chose these shelters, apart from the price and the weight, was the fact that I'm 6'2", so that's what, about 185 centimeters, and most tents unfortunately don't really cater very well for people beyond 6 foot. And the sizing on the website gave me an indication this would be a reasonable choice. So let's actually have a look in reality. So this is obviously the maximum floor space, but we are looking at 213 centimeters by 75 centimeters on the Solo. Now obviously there is the pitch to consider, and once I lay down on this, in fact let's just lay down on this now and I'll give you an idea. You can see I'm probably pretty close to the edge, but you have to allow for the fact that there will be a 2.5 centimeter sleeping mat and that will raise you up slightly, and it doesn't trouble me too much with my head or feet being against the material, as long as the material's not pushing the inner to the outer, and obviously that gives you a completely different problem. Now on the Duo, I have a feeling this is slightly longer. So this is coming again at 214 centimeters, 214 by 120, 125, which is actually quite a nice floor footprint for the two of us being in there, me being tall and my wife being very small. There is a question mark over the actual thickness of the floor. The hydrostatic heads are very respectable, 5,000 millimeters. The floor is thinner material, there's no two ways about it. I think people that would like to have a bit of confidence when you're pitching a tent like this in stony ground or ground where a hedge may have been cut and there might be prickles around, you might want to either make or find yourself a ground cover to go beneath the shelter. And my dog's just come in to join me for the show, but she's out hunting once again. Right, let us now get the poles in place and watch it take shape. So with the pole set that comes with the Solo in this case, you'll notice that there is a slight bend to them, already pre-bent to suit your shelter, so you've got to be careful that you don't mistreat these in any way. But it's worth noting that there is an inside and an outside to this section, the junction point, which is at each end of the tent, and that's the same on both the Duo and the Solo. So that should be facing the outer material, the fly material, and that should be facing inwards on the inner part of the shelter. So just keep that in mind, because if you get those the wrong way round, the whole thing will distort and you'll put pressure on the poles and you might have an accident. So keep that in mind. That's the outer face. And here is the pole completely connected. Now you want to connect this pole before you start trying to fit it onto the shelter, otherwise you will give yourself a really big problem. That is the T-bar that goes across the top center of the shelter, and you have to make sure that is above the pole, the main cross pole, not beneath the main cross pole, otherwise you might find it will bend unnecessarily. So as you can see, it's all connected, all ready to go. So now it's a case of just slotting the end tips into the appropriate grommets, which are already at the bottom of the inner. So we just simply locate that into the grommet, the same on the other side. We then move to the other end of the shelter and do exactly the same thing, gently easing the pole just to make sure there are no poles that have become unclipped. And once again, it just slots into the grommet and holds fast. So now you can see it is starting to take shape, and you just clip on the appropriate clips onto the shelter itself, taking care not to put too much tension and keeping one eye on the poles to make sure none of the poles come loose or clip out. And then the midsection, the spreader, clips into a nice little hole there that's ready for it, and that applies a bit of tension across the center, and that gives you the width across the pole. I would say the area that I will pay attention to, and I would advise people to pay attention to when they're actually erecting this, is if you're doing it in a rush. In other words, if it's raining, just be careful about this cross beam when you're putting it into the sockets, because if that pole comes apart at any stage, it will just bend, and then you'll lose obviously the structure for the inner. So that's the bit I would say just to be careful about. It's not a negative, it's just an awareness thing. Like everything that's lightweight these days, it's not exactly the toughest thing in the world, so you have to treat certain things with respect. Now you're into this challenge that everybody suffers from, is where's the door? So we're all hunting around for it. Is that the vent at the back? It is the vent at the back. Right. So simply now, once we've got the fly thrown over in the right place, we then go round and clip the fly onto the same grommets that the frame is clipped into. And simply put, there are other circles of metal here that will clip onto the tip of the frame. Now, my preference is to have the peg so that the cord is like that around the frame. So the fly clips on there and the peg and the pole is in line, which gives you maximum tension. And the same goes on this side. Obviously the pegs were just put in initially just to pull the inner out, pull the peg out, place the loop in place, and then peg it back out to give it tension. And then we just do the same the other end. Now, to my mind, this is where it gets a bit weird, because if you count up the pegging points, we've got 4 there, 4 there, that's 8, 2 at the back, that's 10, and 1, 2, potentially 3 at the front, that's 13, and yet they give you 10 pegs. Okay, you can pitch it with 10 pegs, but it's at least 1 peg short. How weird's that? Now, I will be honest, it's taken me a while to get the tension looking right, so it's what I class to be a neatly pitched tent. And even so, the reinforced stitching, which is supposed to line up with the poles, is quite tricky to get it to sit in place. What I am surprised about is that there's no inner Velcro tabs to lock the outer to the frame itself. So it is literally just sitting on top and only attached to the inner at the 4 points at the corners there. But let's have a look inside. I can see a few things I'd like to change straight away, but let's have a look inside and get a feel for the space, and then I'll go through what I'll consider to do for modifications. Okay, so the first thing I'm really surprised at actually is that although the zip is obviously easy access and it is seam sealed, it's a single zip. There's no double zip, which would have allowed for the zip to be half open in the evening for a bit of ventilation. So that's really strange for a tent of this sort of quality and pedigree. However, it's one of those things, nothing much you can do about that. But obviously it's useful if you had 2 pegs and you had those extra pegs I was talking about to allow you then to support the door with a walking pole or something else on both sides and put a little bit of cord on it. But we'll come on to that in a second. So let's just pull that back and give you an idea of space. Well, that's the inner door held back. Again, a bit strange that the recess for that, the clip holder if you like, is at the bottom of the door, and the tendency for doors like this is to flop open halfway through it, half the way up, and so some people just use a little clothes peg or a mini clothes peg just to clip that out the way and hold it out the way, because if you were cooking or tempted to cook in the vestibule sort of area, last thing you want is the flammable material to be too close to your heat source. But it's a cozy little inner that would be right for a full length single mat. I'd be quite happy in here. I could probably use my rucksack as a pillow, but if you wanted to, you've got a reasonable sized vestibule here to dump a 50-litre rucksack, I'd say, a pair of boots, and do a bit of cooking. And I say once you've got the doors open and supported by perhaps walking poles, which I'll show you in a minute, then it gives you quite a roomy vestibule area, so you can actually cook and faff around with your gear or whatever to your heart's content. But yeah, a couple of pockets, a couple of tabs to hang some wet socks from or whatever it may be, Well, there's what, 4 tabs in all actually, so you could have some sort of gear loft. I'm never sure whether they're any use at all. I don't really use them, but I suppose it'd be an ideal place to hang some sort of lantern. Then you've got 2 pockets, as I say, one either end, mesh pockets for stuff, which is usually a pair of glasses and a head torch. But let's just drop the 360 camera in here and just give you a better feel of space. So this gives you an approximate idea what it would be like to have 2 walking poles supporting the door, have it open, have a bit of fresh air and ventilation, bit of shading if the sun was out obviously and a bit intense, but it gives you space to sort of cook with a bit of ventilation, which makes it a bit safer. What I would probably do is actually put some short guys on these poles, just so I loop them over the end of the walking pole, but don't forget, not too much tension, because everything is held by the top of the zip here and we don't want to pull the zip apart. But all in all, I'm fairly happy with this. There are a couple of modifications which I would probably put in place fairly soon, so I'll show you what they are now. Okay, so the first modification is this guy. Now, I have no idea why this guy is so long, because obviously the longer the guy, the shallower the angle and the more distortion that it would put on the shelter. So to my mind, that needs to be much, much less, so that when you pull on the guy, it is locking the tension and the main supporting pole much tighter to the ground. You don't want it being distorted by having the guy at a much longer length, and it's just then completely distorting the shelter. It's not going to be helping the shelter stay stable in a high wind, and it is just going to pull everything, all the tension of the rest of the material apart. So that's the first thing I do, is remove that guy, shorten it probably to something about that length, I think, so that when it's fully attached it's there, and then maybe I'll use the rest of it to support the walking poles at the front. But that's the one thing. That's fairly simple, but it just seems odd that it's so long. Now the next one is a bit of a strange one really. You've got this lovely vent at the back which is supported by a rod here which is velcroed into place, and the idea is for that vent to stay open during the night to reduce your condensation. Great idea. However, unfortunately, the slightest breeze and it does that. I've seen it mentioned on a few reviews, and it's mind-boggling how they didn't spot that when they had their first samples. So what I'm going to do is ask Rose to sew a little tab on this point here, and then using possibly not too much tension for obvious reasons. It's not a tension point, it's merely to keep it in place. A small bit of cord, and either attach it to the peg directly beneath or the peg on the guy. And just to hold that in place, because obviously during the night, should it blow up like that and there should be heavy rain and the wind is blowing this direction, it's just going to blow it straight through the vent behind, through here, which is rather annoying. So I would say that was the zip at the front are the 2 most disappointing things. I'm surprised that a tent of this quality at this price has made that error. But the other thing with the guys is more personal preference, but otherwise, on the whole, it should be good. Right, I've gone through this one in a great detail. Let's now get the 2-person up, and you'll just see some of the differences and see also if there's any modifications to do on that one too. So once again, we are a few pegs short. 10 pegs in this package as well. There's 2 guys there that need 2 pegs. So we've used all 10 so far, so that's 12. And if you wanted to have independent pegs on each door, because there's doors on that side and there's doors on this side as well, you need another 2. So that's 14 pegs you need, but they supply 10. Go figure. But having said that, I think very much like the other one, a little bit of fiddling to get the tension absolutely perfect, but a very reasonable vestibule area, which is probably larger than the other one, I would say proportionately. So there you go. Double doors, you can have either side flap open depending if the wind changes. You can have them both open for full ventilation, but this is actually a really roomy 2-person shelter. And certainly I feel that extra centimetre or 2 in the length of the floor just would give me a little bit more space. But as Rose and I would normally camp, we would probably have our rucksacks inside the shelter, using them, as I say, for pillows or for foot insulation, because we don't use a full length mat. And then the outside is great for wet gear, poles, assorted things. The shopping from the shop, beer, cans of beer, whatever it may be. But once again, very much like the other shelter, we've got loft clips. So we've got 4 tabs here for some sort of loft, 2 big mesh pockets at either end, and that is pretty well it. What else do you want? It has only concern, I suppose, is possibly having some sort of ground sheet protector or something underneath. And if you did that, my preference is to have one that's the size of the ground sheet, the rectangular ground sheet, not the vestibule area, because when you knock a bottle of water over there, it will then run underneath here, and obviously everything starts to get wet. So that's my preference. It's also less weight as well. Once again, modifications. Same comments, single zip, so it's not a double-ended zip, which is very strange. Not enough pegs. The guys are, strangely enough, the guys are more the correct length for this shelter, but the same problem with the vent. So we have 2 similar issues. As on the other shelter, I said that the guy rope was too long to allow the main pole to be distorted. This one actually isn't too bad. It's pretty well in line with the pole there, so that will actually hold it to the ground rather than distort the whole tent out of shape. So I'd probably leave the guy alone. However, the vent issue is still exactly the same. There's a vent on both ends of the tent, which is important. We're going to need that for during the night, but they'll both flip up very, very easily with this system. So once again, a little tab's going to be sewn on there, and then we can attach it down to this peg here with a bit of shock cord or something that's not going to give it too much tension, but it's just going to hold it in place. But aside from that, we've got 2 cracking little tents here, and for the money, I think it's going to be reasonable. Obviously, we will be giving you the full report when I've actually used them in anger, and we can then tell you exactly how they performed and if we had any further issues that I wasn't foreseeing. But certainly, my main criticism is not enough pegs. It could have done with a double zip, and a little bit more thought could have gone into the venting system, and certainly a bit more thought on the guys. But again, value for money and the weight, pretty good.